Buddhāvataṃsaka Sutra. Book 38. Detachment from the World. Video 1. At that time the world-honored one was in the country of Magadha, in the forest, in the shrine of universal light at the site of enlightenment, sitting on a lotus lion seat. He had completely fulfilled ineffable enlightenment, put an end to afflictions and views, and arrived at formless truth. Abiding in the abode of Buddhas, he had attained the equanimity of Buddhas and arrived at non-obstruction in the state of imperturbability. All his actions were unimpeded. He stood in the inconceivable and saw through all time. His body continually pervaded all lands. His knowledge always comprehended all things. He understood all activities. He exhausted all doubts. His knowledge was that sought by all enlightening beings. He had arrived at the non-dual ultimate perfection of Buddhahood and fully attained the equilibration of the enlightened. He had realized the stage of impartiality of Buddhas, which is without extremes or middle, extending throughout the cosmos, equal to space. He was with as many great enlightening beings as atoms in untold quadrillions of Buddha lands, all of whom were to attain unexcelled, complete perfect enlightenment in one lifetime, and had come from various lands in other regions. All of them were endowed with the means and wisdom of enlightening beings, that is, they skillfully observed sentient beings and civilized them by the power of appropriate means, so that they would live by the way of enlightening beings. They skillfully observed all worlds and went to them by the power of appropriate means. They skillfully examined the realm of nirvana and meditated on it and assessed it. They did away with all false conceptions and cultivated sublime practices without interruption. They were well able to take care of all sentient beings. They skillfully penetrated the principles of infinite liberative means. They knew sentient beings are empty and have no existence, yet they did not deny the fruits of action. They knew the various differences in the compulsions, faculties, spheres, and means of sentient beings' minds. They were able to absorb and hold the teachings of Buddhas of past, present, and future, to understand them themselves, and also explain them to others. They were well versed in all mundane and transmundane things, and knew their true reality. They examined all compounded and uncompounded things, and knew them to be non-dual. In a single moment of thought they were able to acquire all the knowledge and wisdom of the Buddhas of all times. They were able to show attainment of true awakening moment to moment, to cause sentient beings to become inspired and attain the way. They knew the spheres of all sentient beings and the mental objects of one sentient being. Though they entered the stage of the enlightened, they did not give up the works carried out by enlightening beings. Their deeds, knowledge, and means did not fabricate anything. They stayed in the world for countless ages for each and every sentient being, yet they were hard to meet even in incalculable eons. They turned the wheel of the true teaching, pacifying sentient beings without fail. They had already fulfilled the pure practical commitments of the Buddhas of past, present, and future. They had perfected infinite such virtues, so that even if all the Buddhas spoke for boundless eons they could not tell of them all. Their names were universally good, universal light, universal emanation, universal wisdom, universal vision, universal light, universal contemplation, universal illumination, universal symbol, universal awareness, and so on. There were as many such enlightening beings as atoms in untold quadrillions of Buddha lands. All of them had accomplished the vow of practice of universal good. Their profound determination and great vows were already fulfilled. They traveled to all places where Buddhas were appearing in the world, requested them to turn the wheel of teaching, and were well able to receive and hold the eye of truth of the Buddhas, perpetuating the lineage of Buddhas. They knew the order of all Buddhas' appearance in the world and giving instructions, their names, countries, attainment of enlightenment, and turning the wheel of teaching. In worlds where there were no Buddhas they appeared and became Buddhas, able to purify defiled sentient beings, able to destroy the action obstructions of enlightening beings, and enter the unimpeded pure realm of reality. Then the great enlightening being universally good entered a vast concentration called Buddha flower array. When he entered this concentration, all worlds quaked in 6 ways, moving in 18 ways, producing a tremendous sound that none did not hear. After that he rose from concentration. At that point the enlightening being universal wisdom, knowing the congregation had assembled, asked the enlightening being universally good, "Please tell us, what are the reliances of great enlightening beings? What are their extraordinary thoughts? What are their practices? What are their spiritual friends? What are their exertions of energy? What are their attainments of peace of mind? What are their ways of developing sentient beings? What are their precepts? How do they receive the prediction of enlightenment? How do they enter into the state of enlightening beings? What are their entries into enlightenment? What are their penetrations of the activities of sentient beings? What are their entries into worlds? What are their entries into ages? What are their explanations of past, present, and future? What are their entries into past, present, and future? What are their developments of a tireless mind? What are their knowledges of differentiation? What are their mental masteries? What are their explanations of Buddha? What are their developments of the universally good mind? What are their principles of universally good practice? For what reasons do they generate great compassion? What are the causes of their development of the will for enlightenment? What are their expressions of respect to spiritual friends? What are their purities? What are their transcendent ways? What are their conscious knowledges? What are their realizational knowledges? What are their powers? What are their impartialities? What are their expressions of the true meaning of the Buddha teaching? What are their teachings? What do they preserve? What are their intellectual powers? What are their masteries? What are their qualities of non-attachment? What are their equanimities? What are their generations of knowledge? What are their magical displays? What are their supports of powers? What are their attainments of great joy and solace? What are their profound penetrations of the Buddha teaching? What are their bases? What are their developments of fearlessness? What are their developments of minds free from doubt? What are their inconceivabilities? What are their skillful esoteric sayings? What are their skillful analytic knowledges? What are their entries into concentration? What are their universal entries? What are their doors of liberation? What are their spiritual powers? What are their insights? What are their liberations? What are their groves? What are their palaces? What are their enjoyments? What are their adornments? What are their developments of an unshakable mind? What are their profound, great determinations they don't give up? What are their contemplations? What are their explanations of things? What are their purities? What are their definitive marks? What are their illuminations of knowledge? What are their peerless states? What are their indomitable attitudes? What are their outstanding minds? What are their oceanic knowledges entering unexcelled enlightenment? What are their jewel-like states? What are their adamantine commitments to universal enlightenment? What are their great undertakings? What are their ultimate great tasks? What are their indestructible faiths? What are their ways of receiving the prediction of enlightenment? What are their dedications of roots of goodness? What are their attainments of wisdom? What are their developments of a boundlessly broad mind? What are their hidden treasuries? What are the rules of behavior? What are their controls? What are their unimpeded functions? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to sentient beings? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to lands? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to phenomena and principles? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to bodies? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to vows? What are their unimpeded functions in respect to realms? What are their unimpeded functions of knowledge? What are their unimpeded functions of spiritual capacities? What are their unimpeded functions of miraculous abilities? What are their unimpeded functions of power? What are their versatilities? What are their spheres? What are their powers? What are their fearlessnesses? What are their unique qualities? What are their activities? What are their bodies? What are their physical actions? What is their speech? What is their purification of speech? What are the protections they receive? What are their accomplishments of great works? What are their minds? What are their determinations? What are their comprehensive minds? What are their profound minds? What do they strive to practice? What are their certain understandings? What are their certain understandings of worlds? What are their certain understandings of beings? What are their habit energies? What are their graspings? What do they cultivate? What are their accomplishments of the Buddha teachings? What makes them regress from the way of the Buddha teachings? What are their paths of emancipation? What are their qualities of certainty? What are their ways of generating the qualities of Buddhahood? What are their appellations of greatness? What are their paths? What are their infinite paths? What are their aids to enlightenment? What are their ways of cultivation? What are their ways of adornment? What are their feet? What are their hands? What are their guts? What are their internal organs? What are their hearts? What is their armor? What are their weapons? What are their heads? What are their eyes? What are their ears? What are their noses? What are their tongues? What are their bodies? What are their minds? What is their action? What is their abiding? What is their sitting? What is their reclining? What are their dwelling places? What are their spheres of action? What are their observations? What are their universal observations? What is their springing? What is their lion's roar? What is their pure giving? What is their pure discipline? What is their pure tolerance? What is their pure energy? What is their pure concentration? What is their pure wisdom? What is their pure benevolence? What is their pure compassion? What is their pure joy? What is their pure equanimity? What are their principles? What are their pure laws? What are their virtues used to foster enlightenment? What are their knowledges used to foster enlightenment? What are their sufficiencies of insight? What are their quests for truth? What are their understandings of truth? What are their norms of practice? What are demons? What are demons' actions? How are the actions of demons gotten rid of? What are visions of Buddha? What are actions of Buddha? What are actions of conceit? What are actions of knowledge? What is possession by demons? What is being supported by Buddha? What is being supported by truth? What do enlightening beings do while living in the heaven of satisfaction? Why do they die in that heaven? Why do they appear to abide in the womb? Why do they manifest subtle processes? Why do they manifest birth? Why do they manifest a smile? Why do they show the act of walking 7 steps? Why do they appear as children? Why do they appear to live in a palace? Why do they appear to leave home? Why do they demonstrate austerities? How do they go to the site of enlightenment? How do they sit on the site of enlightenment? What are the extraordinary signs when they sit on the site of enlightenment? Why do they demonstrate the conquering of demons? What are the attainments of the power of the enlightened? How do they turn the wheel of teaching? How are good and pure ways acquired due to the turning of the wheel of teaching? Why do the enlightened ones manifest extinction and final nirvana? Please explain these things to us. Then the great enlightening being universally good said to universal wisdom and the others, offspring of Buddha, great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of reliance. They take the determination for enlightenment as a reliance, as they never forget it. They take spiritual friends as a reliance, harmonizing as one. They take roots of goodness as a reliance, cultivating, gathering, and increasing them. They take the transcendent ways as a reliance, fully practicing them. They take all truths as a reliance, as they ultimately end in emancipation. They take great vows as a reliance, as they enhance enlightenment. They take practices as a reliance, consummating them all. They take all enlightening beings as a reliance, because they have the same one wisdom. They take honoring the Buddhas as a reliance, because their faith is purified. They take all Buddhas as a reliance, because they teach ceaselessly like benevolent parents. These are the 10. If enlightening beings rest in these principles, they can become abodes of the unexcelled great knowledge of Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of extraordinary thought. What are they? They think of all roots of goodness as their own roots of goodness. They think of all roots of goodness as seeds of enlightenment. They think of all sentient beings as vessels of enlightenment. They think of all vows as their own vows. They think of all truths as emancipation. They think of all practices as their own practices. They think of all things as teachings of Buddha. They think of all modes of language as the path of verbal expression. They think of all Buddhas as benevolent parents. They think of all Buddhas as one. These are the 10. If great enlightening beings rest on these principles, they will attain an excelled skillful thought. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of practice. What are they? Practice dealing with all sentient beings, to develop them all to maturity. Practice seeking all truths, to learn them all. Practice of all roots of goodness, to cause them all to grow. Practice of all concentrations, to be single-minded, without distraction. Practice of all knowledge, to know everything. Practice of all cultivations, to be able to cultivate them all. Practice dealing with all Buddha lands, to adorn them all. Practice dealing with all good companions, respecting and supporting them. Practice dealing with all Buddhas, honoring and serving them. These are the 10. If great enlightening beings rest on these principles, they will attain the practice of the unexcelled knowledge and wisdom of Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of spiritual friends. What are they? Spiritual friends who cause them to persist in the determination for enlightenment. Spiritual friends who cause them to generate roots of goodness. Spiritual friends who cause them to practice the ways of transcendence. Spiritual friends who enable them to analyze and explain all truths. Spiritual friends who enable them to develop all sentient beings. Spiritual friends who enable them to attain definitive analytic and expository powers. Spiritual friends who cause them not to be attached to any world. spiritual friends who cause them to cultivate practice tirelessly in all ages, spiritual friends who establish them in the practice of universal good, spiritual friends who introduce them to the reaches of knowledge of all Buddhas. These are the 10. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of exertion of energy to educate all sentient beings, to enter deeply into all Buddha teachings, to purify all worlds, to practice all sciences of enlightening beings, to eliminate all evils of sentient beings, to stop the miseries of all vicious cycles, to destroy all demons, to become pure, clear eyes for all sentient beings, to honor all Buddhas and to please all Buddhas. These are the 10. If great enlightening beings abide by these things, they will be able to fully achieve the unexcelled transcendent energy of the Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of attainment of peace of mind. What are they? Abiding themselves in the will for enlightenment, they should also induce others to abide in the will for enlightenment, to attain peace of mind. Ultimately free from anger and strife themselves, they should also free others from anger and strife, to attain peace of mind. Free from the state of ordinary ignorance themselves, they also free others from the state of ordinary ignorance, and attain peace of mind. Diligently cultivating roots of goodness themselves, they also induce others to cultivate roots of goodness, and attain peace of mind. Persisting in the path of the transcendent ways themselves, they also induce others to abide in the path of the transcendent ways, and attain peace of mind. Being born themselves in the house of Buddha, they should also enable others to be born in the house of Buddha, to attain peace of mind. Deeply penetrating the real truth of absence of intrinsic nature, they also introduce others into the real truth of absence of inherent nature, and attain peace of mind. Not repudiating any of the Buddha's teachings, they also cause others not to repudiate any of the Buddha's teachings, and attain peace of mind. Fulfilling the vow of all-knowing enlightenment, they also enable others to fulfill the vow of all-knowing enlightenment, and attain peace of mind. Entering deeply into the inexhaustible treasury of knowledge of all Buddhas, they also lead others into the inexhaustible treasury of knowledge of all Buddhas and attain peace of mind. These are the 10. If great enlightening beings abide by these principles, they will attain the peace of the supreme knowledge of the Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 ways of developing sentient beings: by giving, by their physical bodies, by teaching, by cooperation, by non-attachment, by showing the practices of enlightening beings, by clearly showing all worlds, by showing the great magnificent qualities of the Buddha teachings, by various manifestations of spiritual powers, and by various subtle skillful means. These are 10 ways in which enlightening beings develop and perfect the realm of sentient beings. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of precepts: not giving up the determination for enlightenment, leaving behind the stages of individual salvation, observing and benefiting all sentient beings, inducing all sentient beings to live by the teachings of Buddha, cultivating all the sciences of enlightening beings, not being acquisitive in respect to anything, dedicating all roots of goodness to enlightenment, not being attached to any of the incarnations of Buddhas, reflecting on all things and getting rid of grasping and clinging, and regulating all their faculties. These are the 10. If great enlightening beings abide by these principles, they will attain the unexcelled great transcendent discipline of the Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 ways of receiving the prediction of Buddhahood, by which they know inwardly they will receive the prediction, arousing the determination for enlightenment with extraordinary will, never giving up the practices of enlightening beings, continuing to carry out the practices of enlightening beings in all ages, practicing all Buddha teachings, having complete faith in the guidance of all Buddhas, cultivating all roots of goodness and bringing them to fulfillment, placing all sentient beings in the enlightenment of Buddhas, harmonizing and unifying with all spiritual friends, thinking of all spiritual friends as Buddhas, perpetually preserving the fundamental aspiration for enlightenment with diligence. Great enlightening beings have 10 ways of entry into the state of enlightening beings. They enter into fundamental vows, practices, precepts, ways of transcendence, attainment, different undertakings, various understandings, adornment of Buddha lands, command of spiritual powers, and manifestation of incarnation. By these they enter into the states of enlightening beings of all times. Great enlightening beings have 10 ways of entering enlightenment. They enter boundless realization of true awareness, boundless turning of the wheel of teaching, boundless means of liberation, boundless different explanations, boundless taming of sentient beings, boundless command of spiritual powers, boundless different embodiments, boundless concentrations, boundless powers and fearlessnesses, and boundless revelation of nirvana. By these great enlightening beings enter among all the enlightened ones of all times. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of penetrations of actions of sentient beings. They penetrate all sentient beings' past actions, future actions, present actions, good actions, bad actions, mental actions, actions of senses, actions of understanding, actions of afflictions and habit energies, timely and untimely actions of teaching and training. By these enlightening beings penetrate the actions of all beings. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of entry into worlds. They enter defiled worlds, pure worlds, small worlds, large worlds, worlds within atoms, subtle worlds, inverted worlds, upright worlds, worlds where there are Buddhas and worlds where there are no Buddhas. Thereby enlightening beings enter all worlds in the 10 directions. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of entry into ages. They enter into past ages, future ages, present ages, countable ages, uncountable ages, countable ages as uncountable ages, uncountable ages as countable ages, all ages as not ages, non-ages as all ages, and all ages as one instant. Thereby they enter into all ages. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of explanation of past, present, and future. They speak of the past, the future of the past, and the present of the past. They speak of the past of the future, the present of the future, and the endlessness of the future. They speak of the past of the present, the future of the present, and the equality of the present. They speak of past, present, and future being the one instant of the present. These are the 10 ways by which enlightening beings explain all pasts, presents, and futures. Great enlightening beings have 10 ways of knowing the worlds of past, present, and future. They know their definitions, their speech, their deliberations, their rules, their appellations, their orders, their provisional names, their endlessness, their quiescence, and their total emptiness. Thus do enlightening beings know all things in all times. Great enlightening beings develop 10 kinds of tireless mind, honoring and serving all Buddhas tirelessly, attending all spiritual teachers tirelessly, seeking all truths tirelessly, listening to true teaching tirelessly, expounding true teaching tirelessly, educating and civilizing all sentient beings tirelessly, placing all sentient beings in the enlightenment of the Buddhas tirelessly, spending untold eons in each and every world carrying out enlightening practices tirelessly, traveling in all worlds tirelessly, examining and pondering all Buddha teachings tirelessly. These are the 10. If enlightening beings abide by these principles, they will attain the tireless supreme knowledge of Buddhas. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of knowledge of differentiation, knowledge of differentiations of sentient beings, differentiations of faculties, differentiations of consequences of action, differentiations of forms of birth, differentiations of worlds, differentiations of spheres of reality, differentiations of Buddhas, differentiations of phenomena, differentiations of times, and differentiations of all ways of speaking. If great enlightening beings rest on these principles, they will attain the Buddha's unexcelled, far-reaching knowledge of differentiation. Great enlightening beings have 10 kinds of mental command of retaining what they hear, as they retain all teachings without forgetting. Mental command of practice, as they skillfully observe all things as they really are. Mental command of reflection, as they comprehend the nature of all things. Mental command of the light of the teachings, as they illumine the inconceivable attributes of Buddhahood. Mental command of concentration, as their minds are not distracted as they hear the teachings of all Buddhas of the present. Mental command of universal sound, as they understand inconceivable numbers of utterances. Mental command of all times, as they expound the inconceivable Buddha teachings of all times. Mental command of various intellectual powers, as they expound boundless Buddha teachings. Mental command of producing unobstructed ears, as they hear all the teachings of untold Buddhas. Mental command of all qualities of Buddhahood, as they are firmly established in the powers and fearlessnesses of the enlightened. If enlightening beings want to attain these things, they should study and practice diligently. Continue to video 2.